satanized tales of truth in the dark world that we live in are going to haunt you. They're going to make you check under your bed. So come join me on Nightmare Truth.
Story 1. Terry Childs was a petty criminal who spent many a time in and out of prison. He'd been inside for theft, burglary, armed robbery. The guy was addicted to walking on the wrong side of the tracks. He soon added murder to that long list of committed crimes. Lois Segala was a homeless girl who befriended Terry Childs. He looked after the 17-year-old girl, who was vulnerable and desperate at the time. She became privy to some of his crimes, but as far as anyone knew, she never intended to shop him to the police. Yet that didn't stop Terry Childs from becoming paranoid. He was a man on the edge, a man who would often be high on drugs and displayed signs of mental illness. It was a combination that was to prove deadly. Terry Childs and two of his crime spree buddies had just a week before robbed the Pasatiempo Inn. He convinced himself that Lois Segala was ready to tell the police. The paranoia and anger inside him began to circulate. He was going to kill her. Terry Childs asked his girlfriend to coerce Lois Segala inside the car and drove to a remote area. Armed with a 9mm Luger gun, he shot Lois several times. He shot through her hands, into her legs, into her abdomen. He was deliberately shooting her in areas he knew she could survive being shot. She crawled across the dirt trying to escape. Then Terry Childs stood over her. Smirking, and blam, he shot her in the head. He threatened his girlfriend by telling her he would kill her and also kill her family. After some evidence was found to be linked to Terry Childs, his girlfriend testified against him in court and he was locked away for the murder of Lois Segala. He was sentenced to 41 years in prison. He awoke one night in his cell and saw a woman in the dark corner of the cell peering at him. His back spasmed and the pain was excruciating. She stood there, not moving. She never stopped staring at him. Her face was pale, her eyes cold and lifeless. He turned his back so he didn't have to face her. But he knew she was there, watching him. He recognized her. It was Linda Anjezovich, a poor, young, defenseless teenage girl who he had raped and murdered a few years earlier. The ghost of Linda Anjezovich would haunt him every night. He couldn't sleep. He was frightened. He decided to confess to the murder and alerted the authorities. He was sentenced to life without parole. There was more to come. Night after night, the spirit of one of his several victims would haunt him in his cell. He couldn't take it, so he confessed to more murders, and after each confession, the ghosts would then disappear. He eventually confessed to 11 murders, all because the ghosts came back to haunt him, giving him some true nightmares and a restless time in prison. Be careful what you do, for it may come back to haunt you. Story 2. Golan Heights in the southwest of Syria during the 1960s. A 3-year-old boy was part of the Druze ethnic community. They have an incredibly strong belief in reincarnation. Here today, back tomorrow. It was this belief in reincarnation that uncovered an incredible and frankly mysterious story. A boy was born with a red-line birthmark on his head. The Druze culture believed that something as significant as a birthmark can mean it's a mark from a past life, and in this strange but true story it does appear to be just that. When the boy turned 3 years of age, he should have just been a happy-go-lucky boy, wanting to play and laugh at funny animals, but he had other plans. went and told his elders that he had been murdered in a previous life. The Druze community were stunned. It was such a shocking thing for a 3-year-old to say. The boy was very clear with how he had been murdered in a past life too. He said somebody had struck a fatal blow to his head with an axe. The elders decided to take him to nearby villages until he recognized the village his past self had come from. As they arrived at the 3rd village, he shouted, "This is it! This is it!" What was incredible was that the boy knew all of the villagers by name. He led onto them and wished them well. The 3-year-old boy recalled his name from his past life and told the villagers. They were absolutely stunned. They said they knew a man with that name, a farmer, who had disappeared nearly 4 years previous. The boy walked to the house his previous incarnation had lived in. The astounded villagers and his elders followed like fans at a Beatles concert, and were shocked when the little boy saw his past life next door neighbor, shouted out his name and told him how he used to be his neighbor and how they got into an argument which ended with the neighbor burying an axe into the past life farmer's head. It seems the neighbor had an axe to grind. The neighbor's arse began to twitch. How could this 3-year-old boy from another village possibly know? The young boy told the villagers he knew here his body had been buried and took them to the burial spot on the farmland. He pointed to the ground and said, "I'm buried there." The villagers quickly dug up the ground. The axe murderer looked on in horror. Was a 3-year-old about to do a Columbo on the murderer and uncover a murder? It seemed so. There was the body dressed in farmer's clothes. The villagers checked the skull. It had a huge crack in it, consistent with an axe blow. The birthmark on the boy's head was where the axe had struck in his previous life as a grown-up farmer. The murderer fell to the floor. His secret was out. The villagers demanded to know what had happened. The murderer confessed to the murder. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The villagers grabbed hold of the murderer and took him away. They dealt their own justice to him. What happened to him is unknown, but he was not seen again. If it were not for little 3-year-old boy using his reincarnated past life to help him apprehend his own murderer, who knows what would have happened without reincarnation? Now where have I heard that before? Story 3. March 1999, Hong Kong, China. Fan Man Yi was a young lady, once an orphan with a troubled, tragic life, a fragile woman who became addicted to drugs when she had to leave the orphanage at the age of 15. She had nowhere to stay. She would often have to sleep on the streets. She became desperate for money, so desperate she had to turn to prostitution. She eventually had a son to one of her clients who she later married. Their marriage was a toxic one. Her husband would abuse her. He would often hit her in front of their terrified and screaming son. Fan Man Yi knew she had to try and provide a better life for her son. In a world of despair, Fan Man Yi knew her son was the one thing she loved. She left her disgrace of a husband and weaned herself off the drugs. She was trying so hard. She even gave up prostitution and worked as a hostess instead at the brothel. It was a start of her trying to provide a better life for her son. Unfortunately, she was earning less money and struggled to pay the rent and provide for her little boy some months. What was she to do? Her resolution to this predicament was sadly also the catalyst to a series of truly shocking and horrific events. Chan Man Lok was a regular visitor to the brothel. He also had, for want of a better term, a girlfriend named Ah Fong, who was only 14 years of age. To top it off, he was also a member of the Triads, a ruthless, violent, organized crime syndicate. Whilst he was busy offloading, Fan Man Yi took the opportunity to steal around 500 pounds or dollars if you prefer from Chan Man Lok's wallet. He was furious when he found out he was not going to let Fan Man Yi get away with it. He told her she needed to pay it back, which she immediately did. He then demanded interest of $1,600 on top. There was no way she was going to be able to get this sort of money. No way. What happened next is truly shocking and abhorrent. Chan Man Lok, his 14-year-old groomed girlfriend, Ah Fong, and two of his low-life friends kidnapped poor Fan Man Yi and took her to an grotty rundown apartment on Granville Road. They punched and kicked her to keep her quiet. She stood in the apartment, frightened and alone except for these worthless excuses for human beings. Chan Man Lok was quiet. He was thinking what to do with her next. He decided beating her is what he would do next. He beat her until she collapsed as his two friends looked on and laughed. Young Ah Fong was shocked and distressed. That first night, Fan Man Yi was beaten and raped by all the men several times. They kept her there for weeks. Sometimes they would string her and use her like a punching bag, beating her till she was black and blue. The ghastly group broke furniture and used things such as chair legs to beat her with, swinging vicious blow after blow after blow. They would stab forks and knives into her body. They would even burn her feet. She could not even walk. She would beg for mercy, but mercy wasn't around this time. Chan Man Lok was so angry one day he repeatedly kicked her in the head over 50 times, smashing her teeth out and knocking her unconscious. The group would force her to drink her own urine and feces. Ah Fong could do nothing. She was scared and vulnerable. The men were sick and depraved. These beatings and torture carried on for a month and one sad day, but maybe it was relief for poor Fan Man Yi. She died. The last moments of her life cruelly ended in a barbaric nightmare. May she rest in peace. The men panicked. What were they to do? They needed to get rid of the body. They carried her into the bath and cut her up into smaller pieces. They cooked some of the body parts so they wouldn't dissolve, which suggests they were going to keep some of the body in the apartment for the time being. They actually overcooked her head, so in a bizarre move they sewn her head inside a Hello Kitty doll. The body was mostly discarded over the coming week or so, apart from the skull and a few organs kept in plastic bags. Chan Man Lok and his 3 accomplices had gotten away with it. It was highly unlikely anyone was going to report. Fan Man Yi missing. Ah Fong went home. She was tired. The events had played on her mind. She was an emotional wreck. It was then that she thought she heard someone crying in the bathroom. Her heart started pounding. It sounded like a woman. She slowly opened the bathroom door, armed with a kitchen knife. There was no one there. That night, as Ah Fong sat in the kitchen, the teenager heard a bang. She quickly ran, and as she was running past the foot of the stairwell, she looked up. She was horrified. Walking down the stairs was a woman, her skin white as snow, her long dark hair flowing. She had eyes as black as coal. She stared right at Ah Fong and slowly began to walk towards her. Ah Fong was frozen to the spot. It was Fan Man Yi. She got closer and closer. The ghost pointed at Ah Fong and began to scream. Then just like that, she vanished. Ah Fong began to cry. She was so scared. It was late, but she felt she couldn't stay in the house, so she went for a walk. As she walked through the streets, she was very careful to avoid some of the dubious characters hanging around. A decrepit-looking man shouted for her to come over. She didn't, but as she looked in his direction, she saw the spirit of Fan Man Yi stood next to him. She once more stared at Ah Fong. She felt like her heart had turned to ice. Ah Fong ran back home. She ran into her bedroom and began to cry. As she lay on the bed, She could feel an icy hand grab hold of her ankle. She looked down and saw Fan Man Yi pulling her towards her, the black eyes staring deep into her soul. Ah Fong struggled to get away. She was being pulled closer and closer. Ah Fong shut her eyes and then felt nothing. She opened them expecting to see the spirit of Fan Man Yi stood there, but there was nothing. For several nights Ah Fong would see the spirit of Fan Man Yi. She couldn't get away. If she left the house, she was there. She would see her stood at the end of the bed many a time, wailing and looking into her eyes. She would be in the house and things would be thrown about. She would hear bangs, then they would stop. She would often hear footsteps walking towards her, yet see nothing. She could not take any more. She had to tell the police what had happened. Ah Fong went to the local police station and told them about the spirit of Fan Man Yi haunting her. The cops laughed and thought it was just the wild ramblings of a teenage girl with an overactive imagination, but they decided to check out her story anyway. They went to the apartment and were shocked to find out she was telling the truth. Because of this teenage girl being haunted by ghost of Fan Man Yi, the three slug turds, Chan Man Lok and his friends, that brutally tortured her and left her to die were arrested and sent to prison.
Join me next time for more Nightmare Truth. Did you lock your door? Sleep tight.